You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in.
a Mamamia podcast.
I usually start these by saying you're allowed to swear, but I can't imagine it happening.
I don't really swear.
A year ago, premiers were fairly boring. Is that rude to say? Not now, though. Now they've got hashtags and fan clubs. Fights regularly break out in people's group chats and on social media. Different states arguing about which premier is the best at keeping their people safe and why every other premier's approach is rubbish. Or is that just on my social media and in my group chats? Today, premiers have become rock stars.
You do establish a relationship where people get an insight into who you are as a person and they get to know you. They either like you or you don't, or they relate to you or they don't. And it's quite exposing, but at the same time, you are more yourself.
From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a weekly interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. There's no denying that Gladys Berejiklian had a rough 2020. It started with the bushfires, moved briskly to a global pandemic, and just when she thought she might be able to catch her breath, the country was suddenly talking about her sex life.
I made a commitment to get up every day and work for the people of the state, and nothing was going to get in the way of that.
After the annus horribilis that was last year, Premier Gladys Berejiklian's work and personal lives were no exception. She's the first one to say, though, she's not the Lone Ranger there. I still wanted to know how on earth she handled it, because even though a lot of people had tough years, hers was a particular type of tough. So today, on No Filter, she's going to tell me just how she did it. Here's Gladys. You were born in Australia, but when you started school at age 5, you couldn't speak English.
No, because my parents came to Australia separately in the late 60s and they got married here quite quickly after they met. They kind of was love at, apparently, according to them, it was love at first sight. They got married very quickly. And it would be similar to me if you or I moved to a different country, we'd speak English at home because that's the language we're comfortable with. So my parents spoke Armenian at home, and they also believed, and they were right at the time, that I would pick up English very quickly, which is what happened. So I learned Armenian first, couldn't speak English when I started school, but at age of 4 or 5, you're like a sponge. And
Did you have a sense of yourself on that first day that you were different?
Yes, and I was determined, and I remember the teacher, there was a few translation challenges, but I remember I understood the concept that whenever you made your first sentence, you got a sentence maker on the back of your chair. And I knew that would be a challenge for me, and I couldn't believe, looking back now, it was competitive back then. But
What's a sentence maker?
Well, once you could say, you know, the cat sat on the roof, right, you'd get literally this thing on the back of your chair. People of my era might know it, and then it was literally words where you could make sentences. But you weren't allowed to have that until you could make your first sentence. And I remember peering into the classroom, and it took me, I think I was one of the last kids to get the sentence maker, but I just felt a determination then to not let it Interestingly, I felt conscious of being different, but also conscious of not wanting to be left behind. So I think I tried extra hard.
Did you have the lunchbox dilemma of a lot of first-generation migrant kids or second-generation?
I don't remember what I had for lunch back then.
It was clearly not a traumatic experience.
No, that was not something I remember. I couldn't tell you. I do remember I was obsessed with cheese sandwiches by the time I got to primary school, but I can't remember the first couple of years. I don't think it was that different. So my mother would have made sure I blended.
When you were 13, you discovered that you were a twin.
Yeah, it was around that time. It was around that time. Well, it wasn't.
How did you find out?
It wasn't such a significant thing because my dad had mentioned it during the years, but I never took him seriously. And then for the first time, my parents said, you better go and get it. Kids didn't have a passport. And they said, well, you don't know when there's an opportunity to travel overseas as a family, so let's get you a passport. And then I had to get a full birth certificate, and that's when it said elder born of twins. So even though I'd been told, it didn't really dawn upon me until I saw it. And
did you have questions?
Yeah, I still do. My parents never wanted to talk about it, so I imagine it was quite a traumatic thing for them. And so it's still not really spoken about much.
Did you have a twin sister or a twin brother? Do you
sister,
even know?
Yeah. I don't know if it was identical or fraternal.
And you don't know how long they lived for?
No, not really. I think it was classified as I think she died during birth. Yeah.
Do you ever, like everyone imagines they've got a secret twin, or you're the second person that I've met who has a twin sister who was stillborn. I mean, without being woo-woo, does it give you an extra drive? Do you feel like something's missing?
I think it does. It thinks, and because now my mother spoke about it publicly for the first time, actually, when she was interviewed during the last election. And I can say now that I think I carried a lot of survivor guilt insofar as that's why I wanted to please my parents all the time, because I felt guilty that I lived and
without
she
even
didn't.
knowing.
Yeah, well, or post knowing.
After you found out, right.
It was like, well, I lived and she didn't, and so I need to please my parents because I did feel that I carried a bit of, probably still do.
That must have been devastating for your parents at a time when probably there was no forum for them to grieve.
Yeah, and there wasn't, certainly, 50 years ago, things were very different to what they are now. Yeah.
Your younger sisters, your parents worked, so you sort of looked after them
I
a bit?
did, and that's why they say any failure in parenting is partly attributed to me. In fact, my sisters mentioned it last night. We were all out to dinner together with some close friends, and they said, Glad, any deficiencies in parenting we partly attribute to you. So I said, thank you for that. But it was just accepted. I had very hardworking parents who wanted to give us the opportunities they didn't have. And
were they much younger than you, your sisters?
Not much younger, but sufficiently younger for me to be able to mother them. So
I read you saying once that one of your sisters is often asked if she's your daughter.
Yes, my youngest sister. Well, because she's like your
she
staff.
Must love that.
She's like your staff that I'm outside. Very cool and very fashion forward and very pop culture focused. So even though we're sisters, she's almost a different generation. And not so much because of the years of difference, but just because of attitude and
How was your life as a premier 12 months ago, or maybe a little bit longer than 12 months ago? Just like, what's the day-to-day of a premier like? Because before you were a premier, you used to catch, is it the bus or the train?
Yeah, I used to catch the bus, and I gave up on that because it became too difficult.
With security?
Yeah, because then they had to follow the bus, and then it was when your actions cause a bit of disruption to the people around you, you modify your behaviour. So I stopped doing that. I stopped going shopping with my sisters and friends, because you just get stopped all the time. So it's just, and it's not for me. I love it when the public, speaks to you and the public engages with you. I really love that. But you don't want to impose that kind of, disruption on other people. So you modify your behaviour for that reason and for no other reason.
So that must have felt like your life was like a lot smaller after you became premier, while also being much bigger in many ways.
It did, but having to deal with a natural disaster of the bushfires and then COVID, I think all of us felt that during COVID. We all cocooned. We all kind of shedded what we didn't have to do. So again, I didn't feel too different from everybody else. But one major learning from the bushfires, I should say a couple of major learnings. One is listen to expert advice. And secondly, you can't deal with a major crisis through one government agency. It has to be a whole of government response. And that's why very early on I knew, whilst we've got phenomenal people in health, the pandemic was broader than health. It was a Team New South Wales response. So we've got the police on board, Service New South Wales on board, education on board. So it was this whole of government response to the bushfires that really opened my eyes to what I needed to do for COVID. And that's what I think allowed us to formulate the systems and use the time during lockdown to get prepared for the pandemic moving forward.
Did you have to lead in a different way? Like, did you have to run your days and lead in a different way during the pandemic? What changed?
The centralisation of decision-making. So ordinarily you delegate decision-making on various things to relevant people, but when there's a crisis and it's all hands on deck, ultimately the responsibility stops with you.
So how do you process the idea of, I have to make a decision to send everyone into lockdown? This is going to impact millions of people. How do you go, oh my God, what if I make the wrong decision? Like, how do you not have analysis paralysis?
I did that. I'm a very decisive person, and I did consider all the options, but at the end of the day, you take what you believe to be the best course of action at that time. And time, you might look back and think, gee, I didn't do the right thing, or I should have done things differently. And that's, leadership's never perfect, decision-making's never perfect, but you always have to make the right decision based on what you know at the time. And looking back, yes, we've made mistakes, we're not perfect, but I don't regret any major decision we took, because I feel that even during the lockdown, as difficult as it was, and I remember being alone over Easter, which I've never had to do before, but, You know, that's a very special time for my family. But I knew other people were going through the same thing. But that allowed us to manage our hospital capacity. I mean, we were still worried about thousands of people going to hospital then because that's what was happening around the world.
And doctors having to choose between who gets a ventilator.
All those things. And we only had 500 ventilators then, but by the end of the lockdown, we'd managed to secure 2,000 and even got 2 local manufacturers to start building. So we were all, and PPE equipment. So we knew what we needed to fight the disease, but we didn't quite know where it was going to go. And at that stage, all the cases were overseas travellers and how that was spreading in the community, and we didn't have the quarantine system, so it was self-isolating. And that period in lockdown, I think we utilised as best we could to put the systems in place. Yeah.
During the pandemic, when I would see you day after day and telling us turning up for work and telling us what to do and everything, I remember thinking, I hope she's got someone at home in whatever capacity looking after her and taking care of her. Did you?
Well, I felt very well supported because, again, I didn't feel I was any different to lots of other people going through, that.
Except you were the Premier. We could all stay in our pajamas.
Yeah, but I also have to say that I didn't try and think about it too much, to be honest, because I'm also very well supported. I have staff, I have a team. I can ask experts, and I have means to support myself that other people don't. So that's a position of privilege as far as I'm concerned. So I never really indulged or thought about that. But now it's a bit of a different type of leadership style because you're used to those difficult days and the challenges that come up before you're in a better position to respond to. But I never had the time or the inclination to kind of let myself go there, to be honest.
Were there some surreal moments that you can think of where you just, those situations that you were in that you thought, I would never thought that I would be doing this, or this would be the world?
Closing down schools and lockdown was horrible, because it's against the grain of how I like to do things.
I imagine everyone in a room and saying, Premier, what's your decision? And you say, I've decided we are locking down. Is that how it works?
No, it's not how it works. And it's fair to say that when you have inclusive decision-making, which I try to do, at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, but when you involve the experts and all the different agencies, you're never going to have 100% agreement all of the time. So you do need to rely on the expert health advice first and foremost, but also the ability of other agencies to back that in. So if you decide to have a lockdown, are the police ready to do that? If you're going to bring in a quarantine system, are the police ready? Is Service New South Wales ready to communicate it to the public? So there are a number of things you need to consider. Even when you get the best health advice, it's, well, how do you turn this into public policy? And do you have the support mechanisms to deal with it? So it was never... I never felt anyone saying, Premier, what do you decide now? It was more about, well, you kind of have to be proactive and lead the team and say, this is what we need to consider. What's your advice? What's your advice? Well, then this is what we should do.
Was there a time where you went, I think it's going to be okay?
I thought that every day.
Really?
Yeah. Because I'm an optimist. And secondly, I never believe there's a situation we can't withstand. And I just think the human race survives and we're resilient, and we have a lot of advantages other nations don't, like being an island continent, having strong government, having a population that gets information and is largely respectful of authority and decisions. So we had a lot going for us.
It was amazing how compliant everyone was.
Yeah. But I also knew that there's a measure to that compliance. If you take it for granted or you don't bring the community with you, it's not going to continue. So that was always top of mind as well. But we had a lot going for us. So I never, ever thought we're not going to get through this. It was a question of how are we going to get through this? How can we reduce the burden on our citizens during the process? So that was it. For me, it was never will we. It was always how are we going to deal with it? Yeah.
In the first press conference that you had as a Premier, you were asked a question about your private life, about whether you were married, whether you weren't, and you basically said, bring it, ask me whatever you want.
Yeah.
Is there a sense of, an unmarried woman of your age is somehow in your world seen as this rare species that needs to be understood? Or
no, I think people assume that if you don't have a particular predictable life that somehow you can't relate or make decisions to people, and I don't think that's the case.
Or is it about just wanting to know a little bit more about who you are?
I think it's all of the above, but I also think people expect or people promote leaders as having this perfect life. No, nobody does, and I've never been one to pretend that. So I just think being yourself. And, you know, if you'd asked me at 20 what my life would look like, it would not have been how it turned out.
What did you think?
I would have loved to have met the right person and had kids, but that's not how life worked out. So you have to make the best of, you know, your circumstances. And I've always been very ambitious in terms of wanting to do well and giving back to the community. So you just make the best of every opportunity you have. And I think that's the other thing, that people make judgments of you, especially of women, that you've made the choice to do X, Y, and Z. Well, sometimes it's not the choice.
It's as if it's like one day you're told, okay, would you like this choice or this choice?
And
but
it's not like
that,
and it's life circumstance. And some women take courageous decisions based on their lack of options and things like that. And every woman kind of thinks about those options, and you kind of you try and make the best of your circumstances. You try and make the best of what life has dealt. And to some extent you can control things in your life, but to a lot of extent you can't. And so I guess, I don't like hearing other women questioned as well, or assertions made about you proactively made a choice not to have kids or to have kids or to do this or do that. Well, sometimes it's not a choice that you've been.
It's a circumstance.
Correct.
I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter with Gladys Berejiklian. And up next, Gladys talks about this.
Well, explosive new details about disgraced MP Daryl Maguire's secret romance with the Premier have been exposed as he was questioned for his second day at ICAC.
Tonight, Gladys Berejiklian is fighting for her job after admitting to keeping secret a close personal relationship with disgraced former MP Daryl Maguire.
When everything came out about your personal life, was that a nightmare?
It was a nightmare because a lot of things that were said or asserted weren't even true, but you just have to deal with what is thrown at you. And for me, the most important thing was not losing focus of what I had to do every day.
But how can't you? Like, you seem to be such a private person anyway.
Yeah.
And all that stuff was out there. You were being asked the most outrageously personal questions. Like, I would have wanted to hide under a table.
Yeah.
But you fronted, like, what was your decision-making process? I'm going to just front up?
No, my decision-making process is, my party room when Mike Baird retired gave me the opportunity to be the Premier of this state, and then the public voted for me on March 2019. I made a commitment to get up every day and work for the people of the state, and nothing was going to get in the way of that, and nothing will get in the way of that. So that was my determination. I've been elected by the people to do a job, and I knew people relied on me, needed me to do my job, and I wasn't going to let myself distracted at all. I wouldn't let myself get distracted, and I never will. And
Were there dark days, though?
You don't have time to think about that.
There were dark days for me on your behalf.
Yeah, I know. I can
was
imagine
like-
that, but I just blocked it out. I didn't read everything. I didn't listen to things. I just got up, and I had got myself into a routine about getting up, getting my health briefings, I did not let myself get distracted, and I couldn't, and I wouldn't, and I still won't. But I looking back, I'm realised I'm a stronger person than I thought I was, and I think I'd underestimated how determined I was to do my job without distraction. And I hope people know that no matter what was going through, and it's no different because we could have employees who are having certain things happen at home, but you expect them to do their job when they're at work, and you don't ask questions. Some people are oversharers, some are private people.
You're not an oversharer.
No, I'm not an oversharer. But having said that, I think it's, the difference for me is it played out publicly, and 25 million people in Australia, and I'm sure some overseas cared about that. But that's the big difference, having to deal with it publicly. But I'm glad that I did not, Gladys, I'm glad that I did not let myself get distracted because there was too much at stake.
Were your parents okay? Because no one wants to have a conversation with their
No,
parents
I
about their
didn't
sex
know.
life, and
They
no one
weren't-
wants to have a
nah.
conversation with their child about their sex life.
They were great. They're not, we don't overshare in my family.
Yeah, clearly.
No, we don't overshare. We just very.
So they just wanted to know that you were okay.
Yeah, we're just practical. They, said all the right things. And so we're just very practical, get on with life, and we're a pretty resilient kind of family. So
Did you worry it might cost you your job?
I didn't think about it.
I did.
Yeah, no, because when you know you've not done anything wrong, it's like, You know, I knew in my heart I've done nothing wrong. How others comment on it is their business. What I need to do is lead from the front, make good decisions, and therefore I didn't think about it.
So you got through the bushfires.
Yeah.
You got through lockdown.
Yeah.
You got through that personal drama.
Yeah.
And then you were like, did you sort of go, Christmas is coming. I'm just going to have Christmas. I'm going to see my family. I'm going to have a rest.
No.
You didn't think that?
No, because traditionally the summer break always brings challenges. Natural disaster, road toll. I mean, there are always things to worry about. So you can't rest on your laurels. And
Did you have a break planned?
Yes, but I had to keep pushing it back. I had a break planned just before or after Christmas, and then the Northern Beaches cluster broke, and I didn't feel it was the right time for me to take a break then. But to be honest, I took a break more than anything to satisfy others that I take. I didn't feel I needed one, but often you can't see that you need one.
You must have been running on adrenaline though for like 10 months or 11 months.
I've got pretty good stamina. I think
you seem very even.
Yeah, I've realised that in leadership you need a few things to be able to sustain your position, and having good stamina is one of them. And I've got I'm not good at a lot of things, but I've got really good stamina.
How do you fill your cup, to use an expression? What fills your cup to give you that stamina?
I guess the responsibility I feel about my job.
No, but what actual things do you do?
What do I do? Good question. I try and get good sleep.
How much?
It depends, but during sometimes the pandemic, you're up late and up early. But
I imagine you and Kerry Chant texting late into the night.
Yeah, but we're quite respectful. We're both really organised, and yes, sometimes things hit the fan and you've got to drop everything. But
were you good friends before this?
I knew her, and we'd worked together briefly during flu vaccines and general health things. I'd probably professionally interact with her 2 or 3 times a year, but nothing like what it is now, which is good to know because New South Wales is full of really talented people.
I interrupted you. You said sleep. What else?
Good sleep. Try and eat really healthily. Do
you have someone who cooks meals for you?
No, I do that myself. But
you have to cook for yourself?
Yeah, but that's okay.
At the end of a long day?
Yeah, but that's okay. Well, to be fair, my mother was so cute. I wasn't going inside the house to visit my parents because I was worried about giving them COVID. But we'd talk in the driveway and my mother would say, Glad, here's your Uber. But it was like she would literally have cooked stuff to put in the freezer.
For your Uber Eats, but it was actually Mrs. Gladys.
It was my mum. So she actually, when I went to visit them, I didn't want to go over there more than once a week, even though I stood in the driveway, and she would leave a plastic bag on the steps, and it would be like 2 or 3 days worth of, so I'd put it in the freezer and that was ready. But, I'm...
Do you cook?
Yeah, quick things and simple things. And also I'm big on salads and I eat simply. I mean, obviously in my job though, prior to COVID, you'd be eating out a lot all the time as well. So I try and eat as healthily as I can. One thing I failed on was maintaining my exercise regime, which I regret.
Yeah, so what exercise do you do? What's your exercise?
I used to go to the gym a couple of times,
At Parliament?
No, never at Parliament.
Why? Is it seedy in there?
No, it's
Smells
just
bad.
like who wants to be in activewear in front of their colleagues?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Think of that. Yeah.
So no, I went to the local gym. Very good local gym actually, but during COVID, obviously,
closed.
I refrained. Yeah, it was closed. And
can you do that stuff though? Like before you came, your security came earlier and they swept, and they're here now, and that hasn't happened since Julia Gillard was here. Interestingly. Can you just go, I'm just going to go down to the shops now, or I'm going to meet a friend for a coffee or go for a walk?
I shouldn't divulge. But generally speaking...
You still have some freedoms.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask if people's attitudes to you have changed. Like, COVID has brought out some strong views, people saying, yes, lockdown, no lockdown, I agree with you, I don't agree with you. I imagine you're feeling a lot of love. But do people also shout things at you? Do you feel unsafe sometimes?
No, I don't actually. No. The only thing that I worry about sometimes is if you're in a busy supermarket or something trying to do your shopping and you let
do you do that?
Yeah. But if you let one person have a selfie, then you get a crowd, and so that's a bit difficult. But so it's just managing.
Been actually a good thing for you?
No, people still no, they still recognise you. I've been in I've had my hair tied back. hat, glasses, mask, and people still recognise.
Really?
It's pretty cool. I'm always impressed. I always say to them, "How did you know it was me?"
And what did they say?
They go, "We just did." I said, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, you're iconic.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. That's a word I wouldn't use, but I'm recognisable, I would say.
I also imagine that all the premiers, or did you and Dan Andrews and ScoMo have a group text during the pandemic? Because for a while, like when things were full on during lockdown and stuff in the beginning before people knew what was going on.
Yeah, and when, National Cabinet, all the premiers were kind of meeting because the COAG meeting on the 13th of March last year was telling in that was the last time we were face-to-face before the lockdowns and before COVID. And so we'd already established then a routine of speaking frequently to each other. So that was already established. But during various times of the pandemic, it's fair to say early on, all the states were much more on the same page in dealing with the pandemic. But then as time's moved on, obviously the differences have emerged just in terms of we all have the same objective, which is zero community transmission. Like every state wants to make sure that there's no transmission in the community. But obviously different leaders have a different pathway to how you might achieve that and how you can keep that. And so it was really interesting for me early on, all of us were on the same page. But as time's progressed and as it's dawned upon us that this could be a few years, to go, that different states have taken different approaches. So, which is interesting in itself. But
some people love the lockdowns. Like some people I noticed when Perth went into lockdown, my friends in Queensland and Victoria were like, well played, go early, go hard. And people in New South Wales were like, why would you do that for one case? And similarly, when we had our Avalon cluster, people in other states were like, why won't Gladys lock down? So it's like it's become almost like...
Well, I think it's because various leaders in states, including myself, have outlined a plan for how our state's going to manage it. And people have trust in that plan. And our plan always has been to minimise the burden on your citizens, to keep the economy open as much as possible because that risks jobs if you don't, with an eye on the medium and long term, not just the short term. And can we manage things without putting unnecessary stress on families? Can we manage things without forcing businesses to have an uncertain operating environment? And so we want to give people the opportunity to plan ahead, to feel confident, to make decisions about where they're going to work from, the confidence that their children are going to be able to go to school. So that was definitely our approach. I don't like the idea of shutting down and opening up because it creates havoc for business, havoc for families. It doesn't provide certainty. And if you can manage it in a less stressful way for citizens, well, then that's not a bad thing. And especially when all of us have to find a good place with COVID safe. One thing I've realised is you can't have a hard and fast rule. An outbreak means you have to address it. Had the Northern Beaches outbreak happened elsewhere in Sydney, it would have been very different. But because you actually had a geographic barrier, you were able to isolate.
The peninsula. Yeah.
You were able to isolate that. And also you didn't have those same intergenerational challenges other parts of Sydney might have. Like in Avalon, it's maximum 2 generations of families, smaller families. And so it was just a very different dynamic. And obviously in other parts of New South Wales and Sydney, the geography is different and you'd manage things differently. So what I've learned is to be flexible and adaptable and not just say shut everything down when you get something, is say, well, can we do this in a better way? And, the Crossroads outbreak, which happened last June or July, took us about 4 months to completely get rid of. The Northern Beaches and Western Sydney clusters have taken just over a month, which is, I think it shows, and with less severe kind of consequences. So I think it shows we are getting better at assessing how best to deal with it. And I think the people of New South Wales would much rather the way that we dealt with it because we're not used to the hard and fast lockdowns. I mean, what Victoria went through for, 3 months? 3 months. I mean, we could barely deal with what we happened last Easter, let alone I don't know how Victorians got through it. So I can appreciate now that they're very wary and they do want everything locked down because they don't want to go through 3 months of it again. Whereas we've not had that experience. We've managed to keep things open, and that's what I want to be able to continue to do as much as possible.
Just finally, on our podcast, Mamamia Out Loud, we have this thing at the beginning of the year where we don't have New Year's resolutions, but we pick a word of something we'd like to focus on this year. Mine was friendship this year.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, in other years it's been create or growth or attention. Just it's like setting your intention for the year without putting you on the spot. If you had to pick a word for this year, Not for New South Wales, but for Gladys.
Oh, for me personally, I think taking better care of myself.
Self-care.
Yeah, I haven't really done that. So just in terms of my health and just feeling that I'm at my best every day in terms of my appearance and all that stuff. So I kind of felt I let myself go a little bit because you forget that.
What do you mean?
No, I just feel that before COVID I was physically fit and
I just remember looking at you every day on the TV and going, she's brushed her hair, she's got makeup on, she's dressed, I'm in my pajamas and we'll be probably all day.
But you had responsibilities I didn't have. So everybody's in a different situation and but that's part of instilling confidence with the public and that's who I am. I'm very disciplined, very organised, very routine. That's me. So what you see is pretty much what I am.
Do you like shopping?
Love it, but I don't do enough of it anymore.
Do you do it online?
No, I'm hopeless at online shopping.
Really? Why?
I'm hopeless at it. Every time I've tried it, it's the wrong size or wrong look. I don't get the materials right.
So you don't have a stylist?
No. My sisters are fantastic at it.
Why can't they sort you out?
And they have they try, but
You always look pretty sharp in your jackets and your skirts.
Yeah. I'm pretty safe though. I mean, I like to have at least one thing I'm wearing a day, which is a bit fashion forward, as I call it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can be, if you have one crazy thing on and everything else is safe, it works. But sometimes it's good to have crazy on crazy because cray cray looks good too.
I do like a bit of cray cray.
Yeah.
You're singing my song. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Gladys. Everybody in the office was very excited to see her and she was so gracious. We had a lovely chat afterwards. She was asking me where I got my shirt from and I told her it was Zimmerman and then she said she wore a Zimmerman dress once and we were talking about online shopping. It was lovely. She's divine. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. You can also listen to more No Filter episodes on Spotify now. This episode was produced by Mel Sauer. The executive producer of No Filter is Elissa Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman and I'll see you on mamamia.com.au. And before you go, one more quick thing. If you're after something else to listen to next, can I suggest one of our newest podcasts hosted by a former guest of mine on No Filter. It's called What I Eat When and it's hosted by Sylvia Koloka, who has the best voice you've ever heard.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.